He wrote about love as though it had scorched him from the inside out. Yet, no one could have foreseen what would ultimately take the life of Jackson Browne's lifelong partner. It happened at a moment when everything appeared complete. By the end of that night, only two witnesses remained: an unfinished song and the body of Phyllis Major. They first crossed paths at the Troubadour, the legendary Los Angeles bar. Jackson Browne, already gaining momentum in the folk rock movement, was emerging from a turbulent relationship with Joni Mitchell. His heart was still raw, but his attention was immediately drawn to a woman standing near the bar. Phyllis Major was tall and poised, with blonde hair and eyes that seemed distant, almost guarded. Phyllis had been a successful model in Europe, walking runways in Paris and Milan. Few could have guessed that beneath her calm exterior lay a volatile storm. That night, another man, an aspiring actor, began provoking her. Friends later recalled that Jackson intervened, not out of ego, but because he believed no woman deserved such disrespect. The confrontation escalated into a scuffle, and Jackson was knocked to the ground. In a moment that felt cinematic, it was Phyllis who helped him up and went home with him. That was the beginning of their story. Jackson later transformed the encounter into a light-hearted song, Ready or Not, released on his 1973 album For Every Man. Their relationship moved quickly. They settled together in Laurel Canyon, the famed artistic enclave that had nurtured Carole King, Jim Morrison, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Surrounded by the fading glow of the hippie era, their modest home became a creative refuge. Jackson wrote some of the most intimate songs of his early career there, while Phyllis cultivated a quieter but equally meaningful creative life of her own. In 1973, when Jackson was just 25, Phyllis gave birth to their son, Ethan Zane Browne, at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. Though young, Jackson embraced fatherhood wholeheartedly. A photograph of him holding Ethan on the cover of Rolling Stone became an enduring image of the sensitive, modern rock star dad. But the picture masked deeper struggles. Behind the doors of their Hollywood Hills home, life was far more complicated. Fame and responsibility rarely coexist peacefully. While Jackson immersed himself in touring, recording, and activism, Phyllis began to wrestle with growing inner turmoil. She confided to friends that she felt invisible, unvalued as a partner, and excluded from Jackson's professional world. Even Ready or Not, with its playful tone, wounded her. During one argument, she told him, "I didn't have a child to keep you." Those words reportedly stunned Jackson. He believed he had written something loving. To Phyllis, it felt dismissive. Despite the tension, they married in December 1975. The ceremony was small and understated, signaling what friends believed was stability. Jackson was at a creative peak. His album, Late for the Sky, was praised as his most complete artistic statement, with songs like Fountain of Sorrow and For a Dancer earning critical acclaim. In a brief interview later that year, Jackson spoke carefully about Phyllis. "She helps me see myself more clearly," he said, "even when I don't always like it." The words sounded affectionate, yet cautious, as if he sensed something fragile in their marriage but still believed love and music could heal it. Ethan was nearly 3. The family occasionally visited the studio together, or returned to Jackson's childhood home in Highland Park. Jackson began thinking about his next album, determined this time to make room for family life. Phyllis resumed journaling and, according to those close to her, considered returning to acting. Her first serious thought of doing so after nearly 3 years devoted to motherhood. From the outside, they appeared perfect: a gifted musician, a beautiful wife, a cherished child. But beneath the surface, that image was quietly fracturing, unseen by most, until it was too late. The tragic death. On March 25, 1976, just 3 months after their wedding, Phyllis Major was found dead in the Hollywood Hills home she shared with Jackson Browne and their young son, Ethan. The cause was an overdose of barbiturates, powerful sedatives commonly prescribed for anxiety and chronic insomnia. Jackson was on tour when the call came. He rushed home on an overnight flight and walked into a house stripped of warmth and meaning. There was no suicide note, no final explanation, only silence, and a moment that would permanently alter his life. Years later, Jackson reflected on that night in a rare interview with Mojo magazine. "I don't know how I survived that period," he said. "Maybe it was because of my son. Ethan was too young to understand what had happened, but having him there, his innocence, his calm, kept me from falling into the abyss." In the aftermath, Jackson canceled all scheduled performances, withdrew from public life, and shut out the press. For months he stayed home with Ethan, consumed by grief. Depression set in deeply. He stopped writing, barely spoke to friends, and would sit alone in the studio for hours, staring at the walls, unmoving. But for an artist whose survival depended on expression, the pain eventually found its voice. Jackson began recording what would become The Pretender, one of the darkest and most emotionally raw albums of his career. The opening track, The Fuse, feels like a confrontation with fate itself. Here Come Those Tears Again, co-written with Phyllis's mother, Nancy Farnsworth, marked one of the few times Jackson allowed someone from Phyllis's family into the deeply private space of his songwriting. The only child was a message to Ethan, who was far too young to comprehend the loss of his mother. And Sleep's dark and silent gate has since been regarded as one of the most haunting expressions of regret and mourning in 20th century love music. Not once does the album mention Phyllis by name, yet every lyric, every note, carries the weight of her absence. The Pretender reached number 5 on the Billboard charts, not through promotion, but because listeners could feel the unfiltered grief embedded in its sound. For years afterward, Jackson rarely spoke publicly about his wife's death. But in an interview with The Big Issue, he admitted quietly, "I still talk to her in my head. Maybe that's how I stayed alive." The media response fractured into two opposing narratives. One side mourned Phyllis as a young muse, lost too soon, a sensitive woman consumed by the pressures of a cold and demanding industry. The other questioned everything. Why would a beautiful woman, newly married, with a young child, choose to die? Speculation intensified when Joni Mitchell, Jackson's former partner, released Song for Sharon on her album Hejira. Many believed its veiled references pointed to Phyllis. But the controversy erupted fully in 1994, when Mitchell released Not to Blame on her album Turbulent Indigo. The song was widely interpreted as a direct accusation that Jackson Browne had been responsible for his wife's death, and also as a reference to allegations involving actress Daryl Hannah, his later partner. Jackson responded firmly. In an interview with the Dallas Morning News, he called the claims 100% false, stating that Mitchell was emotionally unstable and still carrying unresolved pain from their past. As for Daryl Hannah, no charges were ever filed. Numerous figures in the music world, including Don Henley, Bonnie Raitt, and Linda Ronstadt, publicly defended Jackson, stating they had never witnessed violent behavior. Despite this, tabloids continued to recycle the accusations. Fans were divided. Some turned away. Others stood by him. And Jackson himself largely chose silence, retreating inward as grief and controversy collided. As the years passed, Phyllis Major's name became distorted beneath the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Yet her true story, Who she was beyond speculation, accusation, and tragedy remains largely untold. Behind the beauty. Phyllis Major was born on January 9, 1946, in Tampa, Florida. Her father was a World War II veteran, and her mother, Nancy Farnsworth, had been a prominent model in the late 1940s. On the surface, the family seemed like a perfect post-war American picture, but beneath the veneer, deep wounds lay hidden. When Phyllis was just 8 years old, her mother was discovered unconscious in the bathroom after a failed suicide attempt with tranquilizers. The incident was never discussed again in the household. Relatives later recalled that from that moment, Phyllis began to change. She grew quiet, guarded, and developed a cold, self-contained exterior. She was raised in a world where appearances mattered above all else. Nancy, though she survived, returned to her modeling career and constantly demanded perfection from her daughter, in posture, figure, and composure, even when no one was watching. Phyllis learned to keep her back straight, her chin high, and her emotions carefully hidden. Former classmates described her as breathtakingly beautiful, yet distant, like a marble statue. After graduating high school, Phyllis left Florida for New York, quickly securing international modeling contracts. By the early 1960s, she appeared in fashion magazines across France, Italy, and the UK, becoming the face of high-end cosmetics campaigns. In 1965, she was featured in a Jean Patou campaign in Milan, where a French photographer famously described her as an American beauty with eyes like Mediterranean fog. Her poised, aristocratic elegance stood apart in a modeling world obsessed with bold, untamed glamour. Fellow models recalled, she could silence a room with a single glance, yet she always sat quietly in the corner, apart from the crowd. By the late 1960s, Phyllis had moved to Los Angeles with a new ambition. She hoped film might offer freedom from the strict confines of modeling, where beauty had often felt like a cage. In 1973, she accepted a supporting role in The Candy Snatchers, a B-grade thriller now regarded as a cult classic. Though her part was brief and largely overlooked at the time, critics later noted her magnetic presence, able to convey sensuality and emotion without ever needing to bare herself. Her acting career was short-lived. Directors approached her with more opportunities, including a lead in an independent film by Hal Ashby, but Phyllis declined. She had fallen in love with Jackson Browne and wanted to invest fully in their relationship. She also wished to avoid what she called the dishonorable arena of auditions. But being the partner of a famous musician did not mean stepping out of the spotlight. In fact, it brought new scrutiny. The press frequently referred to her only as Jackson's model girlfriend, ignoring her name, her history, and her achievements. When she gave birth to Ethan, headlines read, "Mysterious model gives birth to Browne's child," showing little respect for her identity. Her refusal to grant interviews only intensified speculation. She was labeled cold, distant, and unapproachable, even within the artistic circles of Laurel Canyon. Phyllis never fully integrated into the famed music scene. She quietly avoided the endless parties. She often read alone or politely excused herself. Linda Ronstadt once said of her, "She was like a painting in a museum. Everyone looked, but no one dared approach." On one occasion, responding to a condescending rock journalist, Phyllis snapped, "I'm not a supporting character in anyone's movie." Loneliness lingered, even with Ethan, even with Jackson. Phyllis carried a persistent sense of not belonging. Journals later discovered by Ethan revealed her inner turmoil. "I am a doll wrapped in velvet, displayed, admired, but no one knows I can hurt." Yet the legacy left behind. When Phyllis Major passed away on a March night in 1976, she left behind more than a 2-year-old child and a devastated husband. She left a void that words could never fill. Yet nearly 50 years later, one truth has become clear. Phyllis didn't leave only sorrow behind. She left a legacy, not in films or trophies, but in music, memory, and the lives of those she touched. Ethan Zane Browne, her son with Jackson, is the most tangible heir to that legacy. Born in 1973, Ethan grew up surrounded by music, not only his father's, but the lingering echoes of a mother he never fully knew. In a rare interview, he reflected, "I've lived my whole life inside the songs written about my mother. I don't remember her face, but I know she loved me because my father keeps singing it." Ethan carved his own path as a director, musician, and occasional performer. While he never reached his father's fame, he made his mark on independent projects and directed music videos for artists connected to the folk rock scene. In 2014, he created a private video for The Only Child, a quiet tribute to the mother who had left too soon. Jackson, after the emotional earthquake of losing Phyllis, did not rush into love again. It wasn't until the 1980s that he married Australian model Lynn Sweeney, with whom he had another son, Ryan. That marriage lasted just 2 years. Later, he had a nearly decade-long relationship with actress Daryl Hannah, a romance clouded by unfounded abuse rumors, which Jackson consistently denied. It was only in the mid-1990s that Jackson found lasting stability with Diana Cohen, an artist and environmental activist. Together in Los Angeles, they built a household grounded in creativity, shared ideals, and activism. Diana co-founded the Plastic Pollution Coalition, while Jackson frequently performed at benefit concerts for climate action, clean energy, and environmental causes. Jackson's love for Diana did not inspire tearful ballads, but instead a new perspective on time, loss, and the fragility of life. Songs like Minutes to Downtown from Downhill from Everywhere may not name anyone directly, but attentive listeners can hear a prelude of care and awareness, an acknowledgement that someone will eventually leave first. Though Jackson rarely speaks of Phyllis aloud, he keeps her memory alive. In The Big Issue, he said, "I think looking back at what happened and what could have happened is a healthy act. I don't erase the mistakes. I don't run from the tragedy. I let it remain part of my journey." Over time, fans and historians have worked to reclaim Phyllis Major's story. Rediscovered photographs, interviews, and press clippings have slowly rebuilt the portrait of a woman long overshadowed by her husband's fame. From a forgotten muse, she has emerged as a symbol for a generation of quiet female artists, women who chose love over fame, and whose influence quietly shaped the world around them. Cultural critics have also reevaluated her role in Jackson's music. In a 2020 Rolling Stone feature, journalist Ann Powers wrote, "If Jackson Browne is the poet of the broken heart, then Phyllis Major is the last heartbeat that gave that poem its weight." Her greatest legacy, however, is intangible. It is in her capacity to vanish, and yet remain, teaching Jackson and through him the world about human fragility, the limits of love, and the unseen burdens each of us carries. Jackson has loved, written, and lived with purpose since her death. But no song he has written is ever without the echo of Phyllis. Even when writing for someone else, her voice lingers. At one concert, after performing For a Dancer, Jackson looked out at the audience and said, unprompted, this song wasn't originally for her, but time made it that way. That simple sentence carries profound meaning. Love does not die, it only changes form. Sometimes it takes the shape of someone who is no longer here, yet remains with us forever. Some deaths wound us once, some people leave, and those who remain hurt for a lifetime. Phyllis Major may not have been the brightest star in the sky, but she was the one who changed Jackson Browne forever. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below, or write the name of someone you once loved and never forgot. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. We will meet again.